My parents come from Bangladesh, and both of them are Muslims, and we were raised somewhat informally in that tradition. Uh, for a variety of reasons, I say informal. I mean, we weren't observant in the sense of going to some kind of religious service on a very regular basis, although certainly identified with it in this broad way. And I remember praying pretty regularly. There are surahs, and you're supposed to memorize them. And I remember I was taking Arabic lessons very briefly for maybe only a couple of weeks, and that I had an argument with a tutor about whether androids have souls. And I remember I didn't feel as though I was getting a very satisfactory answer regarding the androids having souls question, so I kind of shirked my duties in that regard. And then I suppose had a kind of broad interest in religion as a phenomenon, and I think that I identify with Muslim communities in some broad sense, but I'm not all that reflective about religion per se. I kind of recoil against people who sneer at religion, in part because I have a lot of friends who are devoutly religious and relatives and what have you. At the same time, I think that there is such a thing as a religious impulse that some people possess or don't possess, and I think that I far more possess the spaceman who's kind of visiting Earth impulse rather than the religious impulse. Although I also have a kind of boosterishness that I think that some religious people have, but it happens not to apply to religion per se. So that's not necessarily a very good answer to your question, but those are my kind of broad impressions of religion. Well, I remember once overhearing a conversation in which a guy was asked, "Where are you from?" And he said, "New Orleans." And then the interlocutors proceeded to ask, "Oh, what was that like?" And he said something to the effect of, "Well, what do you think it was like? All of these people saying y'all all the time." He had this contempt for it. And that really turned my stomach. I just recoiled against it. And I thought to myself, if you have objections to where you're from, you share them with your friends. You are also from New Orleans. You don't share them with outsiders. And you certainly don't express that kind of contempt. It just seemed really untoward. And then some years later, as you may recall, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And this same guy, he proceeded to write kind of moving, pieces about the devastation of his native city. And I thought to myself, this person is beneath contempt. And I just, at a very, very basic gut level, think that this is just not a morally praiseworthy individual. And so I think that when you're engaged with something, you should work to improve it to the extent possible. Be constructive. Don't allow your boosterishness to blind you to the kind of various foibles and downsides of whatever it is that you're associated with. But I mean, do your best, act in good faith, and consider yourself kind of a steward of this tradition that you're a part of, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. And in a way, that's a little unfair. Because, Shelby Steele talks about the totalitarianism of black identity, the idea that, one is obligated to identify with a certain thing. And there is a way in which I can see how that's problematic. And, maybe if we could all be wraith-like beings who are free of those associations, that would be nice. But that doesn't strike me as the world. And, you're embedded in a context, and being respectful of that strikes me as reasonable.